All right. Hello, and welcome to today's session, our third session for our bootcamp, where we're finally going to jump into JavaScript. All right. Just checking on the stream. All right. Okay. So let's get the show on the road. We'll start by reviewing last week's material. So going over the CSS part once more, because there's also a little bit more to cover regarding CSS, which we'll start with as well. And after we've done that, we'll jump into JavaScript. So let's get continue with a bit of styling for CSS. So again, CSS is the way for us to style our application. Just like we used HTML to set the foundation, semantic meaning of all of the components of our application, we'll use CSS to style our application. We separate styling from our HTML to make sure that both parts of the code are clean, that CSS is only worried about styling and HTML is only worried about content structure, as well as the how do you call it? Content structure and the semantic meaning of all of the components. All right. Also makes loading the page faster if we don't have to load one very large document that needs to be read by the browser. So we're loading two separate documents that can also be read separately at the same time, which makes loading the page also faster. All right. We're gonna run through this relatively quickly because there is a lot to cover with JavaScript. So I really want to spend most of today on that. So we're gonna breeze through CSS very quickly, and then we'll jump right into JavaScript. So again, you can add CSS inline in HTML or add it externally by linking the document, which we have done in the past session. The selectors, if you remember them. So you have your CSS document. In the CSS document, you decide what kind of element you want to target, or class or ID, and then you define the property that you want to address and the value that you want to provide it. Cascading style sheet, self-explanatory. The selectors, very, very important. So you can select an element, you can select a class, which is reusable. You can select an ID, of which can only be one on each single page. So this is mostly only used for your hero section or your navigation bar. And you can also select any kind of attribute of an HTML element, all right? You can combine all of these and mix and match them to create a lot of different ways to select your elements. Here is a bit of an example of how you can remove, for example, the bullet points from an unordered list in order to create your menu bar. You can also remove the underline. You can change the color to where it doesn't look like it's something clickable, and then you can make it a different color when someone hovers over it. So there's a lot that you can do. Box model, quick reminder, right? So don't forget you have your content, and all of the bits and pieces of HTML are all separate elements that have their own space on a page. We'll cover a bit more how that works today when we also manipulate it with JavaScript. So you have your element always as the center, then you have padding, and then you have the border, and both of these are seen as a part of that object itself. And then you have a margin, which is going to be around the object, which is space that you can give between it and any other object on the same page. And we showed this example so last week to show that, okay, even though we're trying to fill only 50% of the page, so if this was the entire page, 50% is going to be about here. However, because we have padding and we have some border size, this is taking much more space than that, even though the width is only 50%. And the way that we fix that is by introducing box sizing border box. So that means all of the size of the element itself, as well as the border and the padding, so all of these are inside of the element, are going to count as a part of the 50%, where now it's actually filling 50% of the page. We looked into the typography, so how do we add different fonts? So many people not that ever might use. All right. So through Google Fonts, but again, there are many different like open source fonts that you can get and use and install. So this was merely for demonstration's sake. You are free, of course, to use it in your application. After that, we looked into colors. So how do we define colors for every single element, whether this is text, background, overlays, you name it. And there are generally three ways to do that. You have hexadecimals, where every color that you choose has a specific code that it uses, and you have RGB as well as HSL, where both of them do the same, but in a very different manner, where in RGB you decide based on a mix between red, green, and blue, the color that you want. And HSL gives you an option to choose one out of 360 colors, because it uses like a color wheel, basically. And then you decide the saturation with the S and then the lightness with the L to create the color that you want. So giving you maybe a bit more control, but it's very comparable to RGB. And then both of them, RGB and HSL, have an A version where it adds transparency. So you can have your text slightly transparent or fully visible. There are also a long list of named colors. So these have actual like names that you can call them. And there is a website that I've linked last week that shows you all of the named colors that you can select. And then we spoke about Flexbox. And Flexbox is a very, very powerful way in order for you to be able to structure all of your elements on a page. Again, I shared the website last week that demonstrates very beautifully how this is very dynamic, how this is also quite complex, because it gives you a lot of options in deciding how to put elements on your page. But using Flexbox is one of the most modern and most powerful ways to order your content. All right. And then we have, so again, some flexboxing. After that, we spoke about responsive design, which is very, very important because nowadays a lot of the modern applications are built primarily for mobile. Because at the end of the day, most of the people who will be interacting with their application are going to be doing that using a mobile phone or tablet, and especially in today's world, the number of people that will be visiting our app using a desktop PC or a computer are going to be far less, right? So responsive design just means that you add in your CSS some media queries that will define, okay, if the resolution and aspect ratio of a screen, or it has a maximum width or a minimum width value for a mobile device, then you want to have a specific layout. If it grows to a tablet size, for example, you want your layout to change accordingly so that it looks nice and functions well on a tablet as well. And then if the canvas is even bigger, so it's using like a laptop screen or computer screen, then you want your layout to change again. And here you have also always some choices that you want to make. So do you want to keep the same design and layout but then just squeeze it, or do you really want the layout to shift based on the aspect ratio? And this is very important. But again, most of this will be done on your behalf by whatever application you'll be using for the design. But it's important to know how this works, and you can also change that as well if you need to. Right. So here's some examples for just some responsive design. So we're just giving some values, just giving this information basically versions of yours based on the size of the or the resolution of the screen that someone is using to view your point. And then we spoke briefly about project structure in general, where your application structure is generally going to be very defined by the framework that you're using, considering we don't use one at the moment. Our main page, so our main HTML page, so the one that we are using here for this demo last week, is called index.html. That's what the browsers would expect. And then you have all your other files. You can have folders for your media or anything else. And then you have and all of this is considered your root directory. So this is the directory where everyone is seeing everything. Okay, hold on. Okay, it seems that I have some issues with my mic. Give me one moment. Let me just restart the app very quickly. Hello, hello, hello. Right. Can you guys confirm if the sound is okay now? It's good that we're still just doing the revision though. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the confirmation. We'll keep on going from this point. Okay. Was it really bad, or should I redo the review, or is it okay to leave that and continue? All right. Okay. So that would almost cover it for the review of last week. So to continue, okay. Sorry, the content here is not visible, but we'll cover it in just a bit. I'm sorry about that. So let's talk about variables. I messed this slide up. Okay, so let's do it like this. So the variables are very simple. So something that we didn't cover about CSS last week. instead of defining your colors every single time, generally when you're building an application, or not even like building an application, when you want to define your colors for your application. So you used an application that is used for design, for example, or you just went to any website that gives you a good color combination for your application or website. You can define all of these in variables. I'm in CSS right there. Okay. So if we're going to, where are my variables? Okay, I'm doing this the wrong way. All right. So it's very simple. You can either define a variable like this. So you say var, which is the short for variable. Within brackets, you state the name of the variable. So whatever you right. So because generally you're assigning a variable, you're doing this somewhere local. So it's going to be inside of here. So if we're saying that we want to set a variable, so here, for example, here in this container, it says, okay, for container, so anything with the class container, right? So remember the dot is a class. So there is an item or an element in HTML that has the class container assigned to it. And only for that container, right? We are saying that, am I showing you this? Yeah, I'm showing you this. Okay. All right. So the variables here, so we're saying, okay, we're giving the variable blue, right? And this variable blue comes from the root. So this root, so where I'm deciding, okay, I am calling something blue and I'm giving it a hexadecimal code. This is white. This is the hexadecimal code for white. And you can have 20, 30, 100 of these variables. This just would mean that anytime in your CSS, if you're like restyling something or styling it again for a different size of a medium, then you can just use the variable. You don't need to care, okay, what was that hex code again that I was using for like the headers or links or anything else, right? And because these are defined in the root, you can use them anywhere. If I would define it inside the container, so if I would set the var here and the var was never assigned anywhere else, this would only count for the container class and it would not work anywhere else. So it would only be inside of the container. I hope that's clear, right? So yeah, variables very simple within CSS, but very handy to have because you can set up all of your colors. But it's not only for colors. So you use variables to set your line height, the standard size of your text, many different aspects of style in general that are going to be persistent across your application. And then you set all of these variables before you start building. And then when you start building, you don't need to think anymore about color, size, line height, text height, spacing of letters, all these kind of things. So yeah, that is where the variables comes in. Again, apologies, the slide is empty, but there is something there. You just can't see it. Okay. Then something that's very important because it's going to be very rare that you will be writing pure CSS, at least nowadays. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to build something. And when you are trying to build something, you're mostly going to, you want an end result. So there is something yet that you have in mind. And there are many frameworks or libraries that you can use that have already created a lot of design that you can utilize without writing it yourself. And this is the most like common way to build any application nowadays is just use an existing framework that works for your purpose, and then utilize all of their assets basically inside of your application. So we're going to look at a few of these. But I just want to highlight the differences between some frameworks, and these differences are not like very cut and dry. So it's not like it's either this or either that. Most frameworks are somewhere in the middle, but a lot of the frameworks have a design philosophy, which hopefully becomes very clear in a second. So a framework is basically nothing more than a set of pre-created styles, again in CSS, right? That you can just use in your application. And you use these to just develop your application faster, to not think about design and styling. So that's always consistent. If you get it, it's fine. It's fine. So CSS frameworks to three main buckets. Again, this is not a very like call it a distinct separation. This is a separation based on what they mostly try to do, right? Because they will have components that will kind of fall in other buckets as well. So we have a component-based framework, which is the starting point of frameworks for CSS in general. This is the most common use of frameworks still today, which is a set of predefined frameworks that just give you something specific in terms of design. So let's grab the most common example here. Oh, sorry, you're not seeing this. 1 second. 1 moment. So our desktop. Okay. So I'm not saying that you have to use Bootstrap. It's a framework for CSS, right? And it is very well supported. It's one of the first like big frameworks that became popular with people building modern web apps and websites and you name it. And what it does is quite simple. So if you go to the themes, you can see that you have, if let's say we look at this, right? Actually, let's look at components, which will be a bit easier. So they will have designed different components for a website, right? And you can use these to change around a bit. Okay, not looking for yes. Okay, this maybe not okay. Maybe not the best example. Let's. I wanted to show something a bit different, but okay. So let's look at an application. And what the framework would do for you, right, is kind of have things that are pre-designed. So if I look at this preview, right, and you're like, okay, I want to build an app that looks like this. You don't have to go out of your way and design all of that. So it will already give you a template where it's like, okay, this is your sidebar and this is how it will look by default. You can like adjust how it looks. And this is going to be a carousel. So this is like where you can have pictures or profiles or something like that. This is how a text box will look if someone wants to add a comment or like write something, again, depending on the application that you're creating. So it will create all of these components, or it would have already all of these components created for you. And then you basically add Bootstrap to your project. And then from that point on, you can get parts of Bootstrap that work for you and use them in your project. You don't have to use everything, right? So here, for example, we have snippets. So if you want your header, so these are different examples of headers. So this is one way of doing your header. So this is how your menu will look. This is centered. This is a bit more separated. So you have some menu here in the middle, and then you have your login and sign up to the right. So these are different variations, and then you can choose the one that you want. And it will just when you import this, this is how your navigation bar will look. So you of course define what the navigation bar has in terms of links, right? So you have your unordered list, you set your navigation bar items, but this is the look of how it will be out of the box. The same goes for like a hero section. So this is the main section where people will be landing on, right? So here we have many examples. So like this, you have many different okay, I want just plug in the bootstrap sidebar. You have a sidebar, and then you decide what functionality you have. Drop-down menu. So again, a bit of a design for your drop-down menu. So if a user can select something inside of a form that you have provided them, this is how a drop-down menu can look. Date selection. Again, we looked at date selection, how it looks for the browser itself, which is very bare bones. This looks very nice, very modern. And so this is what frameworks do for you. So another very popular one is Tailwind CSS, which we are most probably going to use for our application. Very similar. So basically, it's like, okay, you want to have a part of your component. So you have here, for example, core components. You're like, okay, let's do a bit of styling, and then it will show you a number of components that you can use. So this is like a card. And there are many different things. So you have buttons and they have like interactions and all of these like things that are already pre-designed and predetermined for you. You can change. So they show you the bit of code that creates this button or how it is then set up within your app. But then you can choose all of these components, right, and just have them as a part of your app, right? So you don't have to design all of this on like from scratch. And this is something that you'll have to kind of dive into, right? So you have to look at the library, look at how it works, how do you implement it, and this is also something that's very important to try, because at the end of the day, if you want something specific and you want to choose a specific design, you can tell whether you're using AI to do it or to implement it yourself. You can provide the code snippets that are provided here on how to install it, and then basically you can get started, right? So yeah, let's go back to our slide. Okay, so the main difference between the frameworks. You have components. So if you have a button, you just say, okay, I'm going to add this button, and the button has a specific design, right? Or you say, I'm going to add a card, I'm going to add like an input field, something like that. And all of these have specific design already, where it's modular per component, so per thing that you're adding. And then you have a utility first framework. These are frameworks that don't give you, for example, a button that has like many different elements of it pre-decided, but you can have you have like the look of a button, which is a separate thing. Then you have like the hover effects, which is then something different. And then you might have an animation when someone clicks it, but something needs to happen in the background before they get confirmation if signing up, for example, was successful or not, right? So you have, for example, like a circle that will start turning inside of the button or something that goes back and forth, anything like that. And all of these three aspects of the button will be separate. So you can choose to just take the button and do the rest yourself, or add all of these three functionalities together in your application. So it's more about the utility. So the thing that it does isn't giving you one component that is already fully featured, then you can't really alter it much, but it gives you all of the things in separate. Which is like moving on the ethos of like separation of concerns, because you remember that okay, we do CSS separately, we do HTML separately for reasons, right? But especially using a Java library like React or other like modern libraries, because they generate the pages mostly from data that comes from different sources, from databases, from a content management system, for example. And the pages aren't so the HTML pages aren't pages that you built and that are displayed, but these get built when the application is called, based on who's looking at the page, based on how they're logged in, based on current data, for example. And because these pages are generated when someone accesses the app, or at least most of it is, um, they have just created these frameworks in a way that they kind of create the HTML and the CSS styling all in one go instead of having them separate. So you have frameworks for CSS that will work better with that. And these are like some of the examples. So if you're looking at components, you have Bootstrap, which was created initially by Twitter. It is at the moment it is just a open source library, which is not really affiliated with Twitter specifically anymore. But again, like a lot of things, like even the JavaScript framework React was created by Facebook for their own needs, and again, it became its own thing eventually. You have Material UI, which is based on the Google Material Design language. So both of these are just examples. So these are not all, of course. These provide you components. So these are like bits and pieces of functionality that you can get fully featured. Utility first is Tailwind, for example, because it's very you add. So they're like in bits and pieces, like I explained, and you just use whatever you want and you need. You have something like Bulma.io, which is in the middle, so it kind of provides both, which is a good mix. And then you have this style components, which is just the name of the framework itself, which is again specifically for React, but it can support other frameworks that provides components for React components, which is something that we'll dive into later because we have not reached that point yet. And that kind of covers it for CSS. Again, a bit of revision and some new information about CSS that I thought you guys really do need to know. Any questions so far before we dive into JavaScript? Okay, I hear that the audio is not um, consistent, and that sometimes it sounds bad and others it's okay. Is it good now, or does it not sound great at the moment? I mean, I'm not changing anything. The audio profile looks good, at least in the preview, but I have no idea what is causing this problem. Okay. Yeah. Check stream quality for. I'm also looking at the bandwidth, which all seems very stable. But again, yeah, it could be maybe a compression issue on the YouTube side. I'm not sure. Okay, we'll continue. We'll continue. Ping me if the audio is bad. I'll pause maybe for just a little bit before continuing. All right. So for now, let's start looking at JavaScript. Okay. So we looked at HTML, which was the chassis, right? Where we had a picture of just the chassis, no panels, no paint, no interior, nothing, right? And then when we spoke about CSS, I was like, okay, CSS is basically all of the panels of the car, the doors, the windows, the interior, the color, everything, right? But then your car is still not functional. right? So you have the chassis, you have the interior, you have the door panels and everything, but none of it does anything until you get to JavaScript. JavaScript is the engine, but JavaScript is all of the functionality. You're like when the seats move, when you turn on your indicators, when you open and close the door, when you turn the steering wheel, all of this functionality, or in like web development terms, dynamicness. So to make a page or an application dynamic, that is where JavaScript comes in. Because before the time of JavaScript, when you created a website, right? So you could still call it an application, but it was static, right? So it was just a page with text on it. And then when CSS came along, it made that page more beautiful and it created more opportunities for you to style it. But it was still not dynamic. So the page was there with the information that you had written when you created the page. And that's it. It wouldn't get renewed. A user couldn't just click on a button on the page and then something would magically appear as a new thing on the page, which is something that's very normal nowadays, but not when JavaScript first came into existence, right? So that is what the JavaScript does. Before we start diving into JavaScript, I do want to add that when I start talking about JavaScript, a lot of people ask me that, it is the same as Java, which is not the case. So Java is a very, very different programming language and has no relationship whatsoever to JavaScript. JavaScript is specifically for the web and nowadays for many, many different things, which we will cover once we start talking about the backend. But you just need to know that Java as a programming language and JavaScript have nothing in common, right? So having said that, let's continue with JavaScript. So JavaScript is a high-level interpreted programming language for web browsers and many other things nowadays, right? So in the beginning, it was only for web browsers because again, when you're just like we said for like HTML and CSS, you are telling the browser, right? So the browser, Chrome here, I'm using, how it should display the page and how it should structure the page and what the different components of the page are and how they look like with CSS, right? And we continue that trend with JavaScript. So JavaScript again is telling the browser to do things, but here it's also asking the browser for many, many different things, which again we'll see as we dive in. And an interpreted language just means that the code that we write for JavaScript, the browser reads it. So if you have okay, the high levels of JavaScript. If we talk about a low-level programming language like C or C or C++, these languages are languages that are made to talk to the hardware. So you have a computer, right? And the computer has many components inside of it. So you have your motherboard, of course, that houses all of the components. And then you have like a CPU, you have your memory, you have your RAM, you have your graphics processor, and you have like your disks and all these, and you have like your network interface, you have Bluetooth connectivity, all of these functionalities, right? And low-level languages like C, like C#, like C++ are designed to talk to those components, basically, right? Through Windows or through Mac or through Linux, so through an operating system. But still, they're made to talk to either the operating system or to the hardware directly. Where these languages, when they are written, they also have to be compiled. So they have to be built and compiled into code that can be executed by an operating system or can be interpreted by the, how do you call it? I'm losing the word now. So by the drivers that talk or pass on information to the hardware themselves, right? So this is low level. You're talking to the operating system, or you're talking to the hardware directly, right? And the drivers that drive the hardware. But a high level language, there is a lot of abstraction. So for us, when you are talking about web technologies, so whether this is a modern web app or like an application that is basically just a website, but people interact with it as an application, because many different apps that you use nowadays on your mobile phone are nothing more than a web app. But it looks and acts like a native mobile application, so people don't know the difference, right? And it's high level because when we are writing JavaScript, we are writing for the browser. We're not writing to talk to the hardware. We're not writing to talk to the OS, to the operating system immediately, because there are many different things that the browser and JavaScript as a language do on our behalf that we don't need to think about at all. While we would have to do that if we're writing a low-level language, because you have to worry about memory allocation. So every time that you define a variable or any piece of data, you have to store it somewhere. You have to clean it up when you don't need it anymore, to make sure that you are not using too much memory and that you don't leave fragments of data behind. That could also lead to security issues. So all of these things we don't really do, or at least we don't do anything with specifically while we're writing JavaScript for our web application. So I hope it makes it a little bit clear. It will become more clear once we work with JavaScript, and if we compare that later with something like C Sharp, for example, which I'm happy to provide an example for later on. Yeah, you'll see the difference between a high-level language and a low-level language. Just know that this is what we're dealing with at the moment. All right. Okay. So the role of JavaScript, right? Again, adds all of the dynamicness to our application. It makes it interactable. It makes it dynamic. So things can change on the fly, whether the user does something or not. It enables for a variety of things. In JavaScript, just like CSS, is linked to our HTML. However, you can do that in more than one way. And link it is dependent on the use of JavaScript itself. Yeah. So from JavaScript that we're linked, it's a script that we have created. If it is critic functionality of the application, right? It needs to connect to a database. It needs to validate something. It needs to look at some data. Then we put in the header of our HTML, right? Because then it will be loaded as soon as the browser is looking. Okay. All right. So audio seems to have gone again. Okay, it's back to normal. Okay. Hopefully it will stay like that for now. All right. So again, if you need the script to run as soon as the page loads to do anything, then it needs to go in the header, because the header is the first thing that the browser would load and like run through when it's loading your page. So that's where then the JavaScript needs to go, right? Also, if you have things in your script that happen later, but you do want these to already be loaded when the user views your app, you would also put it in your header, right? The other location to put your script, and you can use both, right? So when we attach the CSS file, we just did one. You can have multiple, but not for the same page generally. So you can have multiple CSS files, but these will be then linked to different pages. But for JavaScript, it's very normal for you to have maybe like 4 or 5 or 6 scripts for like one HTML page, because all of them have different functionalities. So then you can have the things that are crucial, loading something from database, for example, in your header. And then you have something else that would only happen or would only be like actioning something when a user, for example, clicks on something on the page. And in this case, we would add these scripts to the end of our HTML body. So where the body ends, just before that, we would add these scripts, because then the browser can load the entire page before even looking at the script, right? So even if the script takes a little bit of time, so a little bit of time, like maybe like a couple of, like half a second, but even when loading apps nowadays, half a second is considered like long, right? For users to wait for something to load. So then we let the browser load the entire page, and all the way at the end, it will then start reading the JavaScript. And while that happens, if the user is browsing our page, most probably they will not reach a functionality or like click on something for which the script is needed before it's already loaded into memory and it can actually do its function, right? So these are the two different locations where we can link JavaScript scripts into our HTML documents, right? Okay, just a quick summary for reminder's sake. And because we're kind of building into JavaScript, we'll continue next week because there is a lot of depth to JavaScript. So we can't really cover everything in one go. And next week's session will also be more about some practical things that we can do with JavaScript, more than just explaining how it works. How do we, at the current time, interact or like do something with JavaScript altogether, right? So in order to do that, we frequently use especially as a console. So if we're using a console or script, basically loaded into the product. Also, so we're saying that okay, we want to use the console function and console function, and we'll cover functions in just a bit, right? So the console function has its methods that we can utilize, and we're saying okay, we want to use the console function and its log method to basically write this to the console. That's what the console log does. And then when we look inside of our developer tools in the browser, so when we inspect a page, we will see that it displays inside of the console tab, it displays that information. And instead of just talking about it, let's maybe do just that. Do I have it here? Okay, so let me check that there is no. Okay, so there are many different console logs here. Great. And because of that, we will be creating a okay. So again, creating files just like you did before. So we created our HTML files, we created our CSS file. The JavaScript files end with JS as an extension of the file. And inside of my JavaScript, I'm just going to say that I want to console.log. And as you can see, like we still have the code editor basically completing what we're doing. So again, when I write console, I just write part of it, and you see it's the first thing on my interaction menu here. Just making sure that you guys can see that. Oh, actually, you don't see it. No, wait, maybe you do. Oh, yeah, it is visible. Okay. So console dot, and then it shows you all of the methods of the console, but at the moment we just want to log. And then, okay, we can write in here whatever we want. Okay. So if I save this, right? So in here, as you can see, there is no like starting tag or ending tag. This is just a script. So when the browser gets this file, because of the file extension .js, it knows that this is a script, and there is nothing else that we need to tell it. It's just a script, so it will run whatever is in there. So if I go into my page, and okay, let's take this empty one. That's fine. We don't actually need any content in there. So all that we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the header. We're going to say that we want to insert a script. So I'm just going to type script, and you can see that you have a normal script, a module, and a source one. We're going to take the source because we want the scripts to file. And that's it. So this is now a part of my page. And if I get the path of the page, so I'm going to copy the path. So where this page is on my computer, we're going to just close all of these out. And if I'm going to visit this page, so there's nothing on there, right? So we don't even have content on the page. I can, of course, add content. Sure. So yeah, all of these like things that come in here automatically are because of autopilot. So it kind of, you hover somewhere, it kind of tries to think what you might want to do. Which is fine. From the page down, I have some bumps in here, but I'm going to inspect. So I'm in here going to inspect, which opens the developer tools, and inside the developer tools you have the console tab. All right. I don't know if I can make this bigger. Let me try. Perfect. So the console tab here is showing me currently that okay, this is the output, right? So if I go back to my code editor, inside of scripts 2, right? We have console log hello humble devs, and that's exactly what we're seeing inside of our in our console, right? So that's where the console log goes, and we can try, of course, to log many different things. So if I change this here, all right, I'm going to save this, go back, just refresh the page. So currently the page has not loaded yet again, right? So nothing has changed. The page does need to be reread by the browser in order to run the script once more. And if I'm going to refresh, you can see that text changed. And in the script, it would what am I doing? Okay. So you can add as many of these as you need. And then when you go back to the browser and we refresh it, you see that we now have 2 messages, right? So we have 2 console logs. And you will use this a lot when building your application and validating a lot of things about it, which is something that we'll get to when we start actually like building everything and putting it together. So that's the console log part. So let me go back to the slides very quickly. All right. So we've linked the JavaScript, right? We have then added a console log that is read by the browser, and then it's showing that information inside of our console of the developers, developer tools, right? So then, what do we actually do with JavaScript? There's a lot to cover, but again, we're going to take it bit by bit, and we're covering only the things that we really need to know before we pivot into using some frameworks that will like do a lot of this on our behalf. So we have variables, data types, and operators, which is what we're starting with. And we're going to start with variables because that's like the thing that is most interesting to start with, and it's the simplest, right? So to do that, let me go back to my code editor. I have a whole bunch of things here. I'll take these. I'll copy these over because we have the other one already functional. Then I can do this bit by bit. So we're gonna leave our console logs here. We have variables, and variables are basically just little containers of information. And you have various types of variables. And the way to declare a variable is one of three ways, which is by using var. And here we're saying that, okay, var, which is variable, we're just saying that, okay, we want to declare a variable. And the variable here is then called x. Copilot has already like pre-completed this for us, but that's fine. So variable x equals, so we're also assigning it a value. So this is the assignment. Yeah, so we want to assign a variable. We're giving the variable, and the assignment operator says, okay, we want to now assign to the operator, and for now we've assigned the value 10, and 10 is a number which we'll cover in just a bit. The other way is to use let, and this is more of a modern way of doing that. All right, okay, here there is some audio issues again. I hope it doesn't last though. And again, I'm really wondering why it's happening, but it is what it is. Okay, back to normal. Good, we're good to go. So let me explain this also a little bit. So var is global in scope. Okay. What does that mean? And by the way, if we covered comments for HTML and CSS, comments in JavaScript are very simple, just 2 forward slashes, and this creates a comment for this line. Multi-line comments are the same as CSS, so you start with forward slash, then a star, and then you can have like any number of lines of like text or comments, and then it ends again with a star and a forward slash. And then you end. This is a multi-line comment, and this is a single line comment, so the double forward slashes. Okay, so when you declare a variable with var, it is available everywhere. And this can be good or bad. Because if you're going to create an application that might have hundreds of variables, you might want to limit where a variable can be read and where it's available to only a block of code in your application, which again will become more important and more visible once we start building, but just so that you know. So var is considered an old way of declaring variables, but you can still use it, of course. Just know that this is global. So if you declare a variable with var anywhere in your application, you can call upon the value of this variable. And then we go to let. And it already kind of knew what I was going to type. So let is block scope, which means that it's only valid within the block in which it is declared. And a code block we'll get to in just a bit because there is none of that yet here. But we can also just say, sure, let car name equals Toyota, right? This is a local variable. And again, you can read up on like scopes, and you can, if you declare a variable, you can kind of look into where can you or can't you call this, and we'll do some exercise around that just for you guys to understand that a bit. But okay, we have now a variable called, we're saying let. So again, we're creating a variable. The variable name is car name. The variable name is a car name, and the naming here again, I do need to kind of add a lot of bits of information here. This is called camel casing, which is a very common way of naming your variables. So if you have something that is very long, so if you're saying that, okay, this, you always start with a small letter, is for humble devs. Okay, so I started with a small letter, right? And then is has a capital letter, F has a capital letter. So every new word or syllable or anything else, you start with a capital K. You start with a capital letter. This makes it relatively easy to read, even if they become clean. This is much camel casing. Or I really wish that it could just stop for a little bit, suggesting things for me to write. So let okay. And then we have const. And const is when you have a variable that should not change in value. So if you have something that you're setting, let's say in your application, you, I don't know, want to check whether someone is 18 years old or younger, right? Or older. The value for that someone needs to be 18 is a constant. So you're going to say that, okay, I'm going to create a const that's going to be age. So I'm going to make it here. So const age, let's say min age is 18, right? So I can always compare a date that is provided by my user with minimum age, and I know that minimum age or min age is going to be 18, right? So this prevents anything in your application from overwriting min age. So even if somewhere else in my code, I'm trying to check whether someone may be above 16 or above 15 or whatever. If I try to change the value for this, the application would not allow me. And we can look into that also in a bit. All right. So we have let, we have const, and we have var. And these are all of the ways that you're going to use to declare variables. And then we come into, we go to variable types. Okay, so var, let, const. And then we go to the data types that we can assign. And data types are loosely defined in JavaScript, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It is good because it makes it easy to work with as a beginner. It is bad because later when you have an actual application and you want to always know the data type that you're dealing with, if you didn't define it properly, it can cause you problems, which we will also be doing some examples of. So we start with the simplest one, a number. So if you say let length, so this is again just a name, right? It doesn't need to mean anything. And we're saying that it equals, right? So we're assigning it with the assignment operator 16. The interpreter, right? So the browser, when it reads this, it would automatically assign this as an integer. So this is a number that doesn't have a decimal point. So it doesn't have anything, it doesn't have a comma with something behind it or a dot, something behind it. And then we're defining weight, which does have a decimal point, which is then called a float. It is still a number, but it's not an integer, it's not a full number. So this is called a float because floating point numbers have to be calculated if that's something that you need the application to do. And there are some limitations around there. That's why these are considered separate. Let's get to begin in just a bit. And then you have just strings. So a string is basically just, I mean, you would call it text, but it's not, because if this is purple 2, this is still a string, even though if it has a number. This just means that it's just a block of text. There is no enumeration in there, so you can't like do arithmetics on a string, for example. So a string, generally speaking, is just a block of data. is the best way to put it, because it can be letters, it can be numbers, it can be special characters, anything. So any number of that you might do. So if we're looking here at the difference between iota, which is between double quote, and we have the fuel, which is a number, right, which is an integer. It is shown in green, and it doesn't have quotes. And this is how we basically differentiate between numbers and strings. So again, the name doesn't matter. If I say let, okay, so if we have this 125, this is a number, and the interpreter, so the browser, would understand that this is a number, right? No, it's not a number as a string, right? So this is a number. But if I would put this in double quotes, now it's a string, even though it's only numbers, but the browser would interact with this as a string, as like just a block of text, for example. And then, oh, all right. So let's right, just going back to my slides very quickly. I don't want to cover all of these in without showing you something about it. So let's maybe play around with these a bit, because at the end of the day, these values, they can also be printed out. So here we were printing out like separate random things. But for example, we can say, let's do a console log, right? And sure, so car name. So let me explain what's happening here. So we're still logging something to the console, but instead of just giving it a string, so we're writing something to it, we're taking something from a variable. So here we're just putting in a string of text. So we're saying, okay, the name of the car. So this is just text like we had before. But we're also saying this also needs to be concatenated with. So basically we're adding these two together. So the plus just means that you're adding something. This is dynamic within JavaScript, which I'm going to show you another example of in just a second. So it says, okay, this string over here, we want to concatenate it with, that's what you're doing when you're like adding a string and a string, you're doing concatenation, to this variable. So whatever value is in here is what will be printed out over there. So if we save that, we go back to our other browser and we refresh, look at the console, we're seeing the first part, that was the written string, and then the Toyota is the variable. So if I go back to my code editor and I change this to Nissan, for example, and I save that, and I refresh it, right? The value of the variable changed, and therefore the name in here changed. And this is, at the end of the day, the power of variables, and that's why you have them. Because previously, when we're building something with HTML, we're just putting all of the information that we have inside of the HTML. But JavaScript makes it dynamic. So here we have variables. The variable can come from somewhere. It can come from a database. It can come from a form that the user filled in. And then it would like put that information into the page dynamically. And this is, again, the interactivity that JavaScript provides. So let's do it differently. If I would be, so I'm not going to concatenate just a equals fuel, right? And because I can copy paste it at fuel level, it will automatically complete it for me. So fuel level, right? So these are values, right? One of them is a string. The other one is an integer, which as the output already shows here, but I'm going to save it and I'm going to go to the browser. What do you think the output will be, right? So in JavaScript, when this is being interpreted, the operations that are being done on variables are always being calculated from left to right. And whatever the first part was of the concatenation here, so we started with a string, everything after it will be handled as a string as well. And I just want to make it more concrete. So I'm going to let something, and this is going to be equal. Actually, no, let me make it more meaningful. Another number equals, sure, let's make it 100, right? So we have two numbers, right? We have two integers. We have 50 and we have 100. So if we're going to say, okay, we're going to have the name, we're going to concatenate. So we're going to add to the name the fuel level, which is 50. But then also we're going to add another number to it, and we'll save that. Again, thank you very much for the comment. Not needed. We're going to save that, right? What would you expect the output to be of this? Let's go to the page. Let's refresh it. And it has added, so we have Nissan, we have the 50, and then we have the 100, all kind of added together as like a piece of text or data. If we flip this around, so we're going to start with a number. And all the way at the end, we're going to add the car name, which is a string, right? So we have integer, so these integers are being added, and then we have the name. What do you expect the result will be now? Will we get 50, 100, and then Nissan, or something else? Cast your votes now. Okay, so here we go. So no, so we have now 150 and then Nissan. Why? Because again, the process of adding these together, now the first operation is on an integer. And then after that, we're adding an integer to it. So the browser is like, okay, you want to calculate something now. So it calculates 50 plus 100, which is 150. And then we're telling it, but also I want the car name to be in there. And then it's going to be like, okay, but that makes then everything a string. But then it has already created the 150, right? Because it already completed the addition here. And then the car name is added to it as a string. So we have 150 Nissan as a string at the end, which is again, hopefully kind of demonstrating the difference in behavior. Because if we just remove the car name like altogether and we save this, then it's just arithmetic. So it's just basically the calculation you can see. This is a that this is it, right? And this is, I mean, it might not like seem very powerful. Again, when we start building applications, you will see how important all of this is. So it is floats. So anything with a decimal point is considered a floating number, because again, you know, the decimal can float between numbers. That's why it's called a float. And then we have something that I just want to touch upon. It's not going to be something important for you right now, but you might get in a situation later where you need to know this, is an integer cannot be longer than 15 digits, because that is the length of a 64-bit like stores, how do you call it, data space when this is stored. So if you need to store any number that is more than 15 digits, Okay, and there is even a function in JavaScript. So it's called number.maxSafeInteger that you can call upon to compare your numbers that you're assigning, whether they are. So you can just say that, okay, any input field that I have where a user can input a number cannot be more than the max safe integer value, which is this, by the way. So it's a specific number. And if it's more than that, you can then just say that, okay, then ignore whatever the input was, right? Because otherwise your application won't be able to run it. If you do want to store numbers that are bigger than that, so bigger than 15 digits and bigger than this number, right? Then you can utilize a big int value. So this can be done in one of two ways. Again, you're declaring a variable, you're stating the name of the variable, you're assigning it a value, and before you do that, you either call the function big int and give the value, or you add an n at the end of the integer itself, which then when the browser reads it, it recognizes that, okay, this is a big int, so a big integer, and it will give it more data space to work with so that it can store it properly. All right. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. If at some point you feel that there is some weird behavior with numbers that you're receiving or sending or trying to save, look at big int use. You don't need to use this by default. Generally, you really won't be needing that. Okay. Strings we already looked into. Again, it's just anything with text. This can be quite big, but there is something that is very cool and something that you need to know about strings. Okay, so for the strings here, we're using double quotes, right? However, if I say that you want to quote someone inside of this text, Marwan said, okay, and you start to quote, so you open a quote, for example, this will actually break your string because you can't, because the double quotes have to encompass the string in its entirety. So if I have this, for example, in the middle, and then my string continues here, then this will basically become two strings. So the first one will be here, and the second one will be there. Which is it's simply not going to work. Because at the end of the day, so if you wanted, for example, to use double quote or quote outside. So if I'm gonna select all of this like that, you'll use single quotes so that any double quote inside of the text. Okay. All right. Seems audio is glitching out again. Okay, good. I'm gonna just take a sip here. All right. So if we use a single quote on the outside, we can use double quotes inside of the string as much as we want, and it wouldn't matter because the start is a single quote, so the end is also going to be a single quote, and we can use the double quotes in here. A new way to kind of work with strings without worrying about quotes altogether, which is maybe a bit safer, is using a backtick. For me, the backtick is next to the 1 number, but that's on my keyboard. It can be next to the Z letter on your keyboard. So a backtick makes it so that, again, it does the same thing. So it just engulfs the entire string, so from start to finish. And then you can use double quotes and single quotes inside of your string, and that would be fine because the browser, or at least the interpreter, would be looking for a single string or a single backtick to end the string once it has started, right? You might have also seen that all of these lines end with a semicolon, which is at least it is a requirement. So for you, here, when we're assigning this value at the end, we add a semicolon. That tells the interpreter, okay, this is done now. You can move on to something else. Otherwise, it would expect for this part to continue on the next line, right? And you kind of see this everywhere. Again, the browser will tell you, so if this is something that you're not doing, it will tell you that, okay, you have something that's broken here. So if I would leave this and I try to save it, it will kind of at some point warn me that, okay, here you have something that has not been closed properly, and then you can add this, right? And this is something that is unfortunately easy for people to forget, and that's why most of the like code editors they do this auto closure for you when you save and things like that. So yeah, one more thing about strings. So if I want to, okay, let me remove these backticks and just use the double quotes. If I still want to use double quotes inside of my code, I can. I just need to escape them with a backslash. And this is kind of like displaying some weird behavior in here, which is fine. So now that I've removed both of these, you can see that, okay, it has now kind of restored the view that, okay, it looks at all of this as a string. A backslash basically just escapes. So it tells the interpreter that, okay, the next symbol or thing that you're going to see, you should not see as like the start of a new string or the end of the string or whatever. Just read it as the character itself. So that now, if I would console log this, where is going? Console log last name. Sure, just refresh. As you can, those are just as double quotes because I asked him, so it's now thinking, okay, that's cool. But if I remove this, I mean, I would expect it to be broken. Yeah, as you can see, it says there's a syntax error, invalid error, unexpected token, right? So here we have a string, because you can see that the end of the line is here, right? And here it just said, okay, we're starting a string, we're ending a string, and then all of a sudden we have a backslash before like the line is ending with the semicolon. So that's why throwing an error is like, okay, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but this doesn't work. So this is again one of the reasons why knowing the piece of data that you're working with is very, very important, because this kind of error can be fairly common if you're like not being careful with the values that you're getting and assigning and whatnot. So generally, it is quite important to know here what you're trying to do. So if we fix this, or if we escape this, or if we just like remove these altogether, so we're just back to like just like a normal string, and then we can refresh it, and now it works. We still have our console log. Again, you can have multiple of these. And that's basically all I wanted to cover about strings, which I think cost me already quite a lot of time. Moving on from strings, we have booleans. And a boolean value is nothing more than a true or a false. So this is generally if you want to evaluate if something is true or not, or is a match or not. And this is, booleans will become quite something that we use very, very often. But again, a boolean is just a true or false, so on or off. All right. Let's go back to the slides. Cool. So strings, numbers, booleans. We haven't covered null and undefined. So let's do that very quickly. Actually, let's go down here. Okay. So about variables. So if I say let, and I say just nothing, right? Here, I have basically declared a variable. So I said that I want to create a variable and I gave it a name. So this is a declaration of a variable, but I'm not assigning it anything. I'm not using the assignment operator to give it a value. So if I come here and I say that I want to console log nothing, right? And it's already giving away all of the trade secrets here. So I save this. The value that it would print, okay, because we have not assigned anything, what would that value be? I mean, maybe a bit difficult to guess, but that's where undefined comes in. You see here it says undefined. That means that we have declared this value, this variable, but we have not given it a value. And this is something that you might want to do if the variable that you are creating needs to be assigned something later in your application. So you just want to declare it now so that later when you have a function or when you have a piece of code that needs to do something with that variable, that it can, because the variable already exists and it has a memory space that it can assign something to, right? Because if I don't have the variable assigned at all, so I'm just going to get rid of it and I'm going to run it, it says, okay, there is a problem with your script. It tells me even the line on which it happens. So it's telling me, okay, there is a problem on line 37, which is here. So it's undefined. That whatever data you're trying to extract here, there's no definition for it. You never defined this piece of information. This is where other error comes in, where if you don't have a variable declared, so that's what it's called, declaring a variable, you will get that error telling you that whatever you're trying to get is undefined. So there is no data space or anything with that name currently known, right? So if I go down here and I say, okay, nothing now equals null, which is another value that we did not touch upon, right? Which is a valid value. So this doesn't mean 0. This just means that there is no value, but it is still a value, if that makes sense. So we have not given this a string or an integer or a float or whatever. And this is something that we might want to use during our logic, which we'll cover in just a bit, where this is the result of something that we checked for example. All right, so here now, I have a console log. And after this, I'm just going to copy this console log and add it down here, because just like HTML and just like CSS, JavaScript is also read from top to bottom. So when nothing here was just declared, right? So we had no value, it would still throw the error. But later, when it comes to this point, so here we're assigning it the value null, it should print null for us, right? So undefined, right? So this is the first one, which is good, right? So it was just declared. We had not given it a value. So it says that it's undefined, right? Which is correct. And then later it says that this is null because we gave it the value null. So it does have a value, but again, the value, it just means nothing basically. So if we change this to hello, and we save that, then, we refresh here. Yeah, it was undefined, then it becomes hello. All right. So moving back to our slides, right? So we have string, number, boolean, null, which we just did, undefined. So when you declare a variable but not give it any kind of value, objects and arrays we'll get to. So then we have the operators, right? I already mentioned a couple of these operators when we were doing our thing. And the rest will come as we get there. I'll cover a few now, just to not leave it hanging here. But it's very simple. So if we say that, okay, let's keep on working with our nothing here. So we're going to remove this, and we're going to just to say that, okay, nothing is 5 plus 5, for example, right? So here we're doing arithmetic. And this is, I mean, JavaScript can do that. It's very easy. So nothing equals 5 plus 5. And if we come here to the browser, it would actually calculate that for us because both of them are integers, right? And this is something that we can do. So you can use it as like a calculator, right? We can also say that we want to divide 10 by 5, for example. Then we do division. We save that. We run. We get 2, right? So all of these so great. Easy. Doesn't show much when would you use that. There will be many scenarios for you to do that. You can multiply, take a percentage of. This is what's a little bit more interesting. So when we are saying that here, for example, right, nothing is 10. And let's just going to copy this, right? And we're not going to say equals. We're going to say plus equals. So remember when we did plus before, we were concatenating something. Plus equals meaning that I want to add to this variable. So I want to add to the existing variable that. So I'm going to add, I don't know, 30. And we're going to parse that out again. So we're going to console log it, right? So it was undefined first, and then it was 10, and then we added 30, so it becomes 40. And all that we're doing here the whole time is just we're console logging, so outputting the same variable. So we're first calling it when it has no value, then it was 10, and then later we're saying, okay, we want to add 30 to the already existing 10. So the value of nothing was 10, and then we added 30 to it, which is 40, what we're seeing here, right? I hope that's clear. Okay. All right. So, and we can do the same thing with the minus. So we want to subtract something from the value of our variable. So if we save that, then now we're removing from that value, right? So again, this is not, we're not adding it like all together, just like we did before. We're saying, okay, there is a previous value, we want to add something to that value, or we want to remove something from that value. Obviously, this is something that would work like good with numbers. With strings, it would just like it would be very different. But you do it has a different way of dealing with it, right? And then we have comparison and logic, which we'll come to in just a bit because we haven't really gotten to the point where we'll be using these much. And this is where we will jump into our control flow. All right. So, okay, actually, maybe 2 more things before we go. Okay, so let's take this over to our other document, which we're kind of building as we go. So we have objects. So here we were working with variables, and a variable is just like one thing. It's just like a small container of data that we're using to store anything, a string, a value, a boolean, an integer, or a float. If we want to store key value pairs, right? So we have an object. And an object is something that can house many different key value pairs. So here we have a constant, right? So this doesn't change again, right? That's where it says const. And person, this is again a name of the name of the object, right? And the object basically says, okay, you can see now in the pop-up that it's showing that we have first name, and then it's expecting a string, last name, a string, age, it's expecting a number. This is kind of it should be. of course, there is a number. So first name is that right? So we can and why do we use? Because we console log person as a as an object, right? And we go to our web page and we print it out. It would print out the entire object. So if we open this one, and this is something that's very, very common when you interact with API. So if you interact with any external tool, also databases, you are exchanging objects all the time. So you're either sending one, receiving one, requesting one. And here, okay, we have an object that says, okay, we have a first name, we have a last name, we have an age, we have eye color, any number of things can be in here, right? You can skip these for now. So, but that's not it, because that's not all, because what we can do is we can pick only specific things. So if I want only the name, okay, then I can do that. I can save that, I can go back, and then it would also look person, not name. Oh, not name, first name. Sorry. Yeah. So first name, refresh. It gives us only the first name. So it doesn't deliver the entire object. It's only looking for that. And this is called the dot operator. So basically, when you have any object that has depth, you can name its attributes, and then you can just print out that part that you're looking for, right? All right. So we're telling it, okay, this is the key. So we're saying person, and then we are looking for your property that is called first name. That property has a value. So we're saying we have the person as an object, and of the object, we're taking the property, which is called first name. That's what we want to see. We can also just like do a space. Again, like this is a variable, right? So this is still considered like a variable. The object is also like kind of a variable. And here we're putting in some space. Again, it's all writing it for me, but I only want this part. So I'm not going to write all of it. So person dot last name. And that's it, right? Okay, this is already there. Good. So what we've created here is we're saying that, okay, we want to take only the first name here. And adding to that, we're adding just a space. So this is a string with nothing in it besides just a space. And then we're adding to that the last name as well. So if we save that and we go back to our console, you can see that you get the entire name here, right? And this is how a lot of the data will be coming into your application. This is how you're going to eventually structure it to be displayed. Not in the console, of course, but somewhere on your page. So yeah, that's the object. And the array works a bit differently, which is just basically a list of items. And just like the object, we can get individual items, but as you can see, there is no piece. So the objects, the arrays, I mean, right? This will basically and the array start from index 0, right? This is something that's very, very important because everything else in JavaScript also like counts as you would normally count, where 0 is not a count, it's just 0. So everything would start from 1, except for arrays. So arrays are kind of inherited from like programming languages in general, which in which arrays always start with the index 0. So you start counting at 0. So the first input is 0. then you have 1, then you have 2. So if we're saying that we want to log cars, right, which is the array, at index, so this is how you basically create the same structure as you have, because the array is basically just this. So const new array equals, and just by doing this is an array. This is an empty array. So there, okay, and we're going to end our array here. So if we have here, for example, this would be 0 and this would be 1, right? So here, if we're saying that, okay, we want to get cars and we want the first value, that's going to be 0. So if we save that and we go back to our console log, you see that we get Nissan. And if we go back and we're like, okay, give us the second one. So this is 0, 1, 2. We say we want 2, save it. We get BMW. So this is, and of course, like we can do all of these crazy things here to get like multiple values. We can also say that, okay, we want from 0 to 3 or 0 to 2. We can like give a range. So there's a lot there, but it's just briefly to kind of explain what arrays are. There are methods to like add something to an array or remove something from an array, but this is a bit more complex, and we'll cover that for the next time. For now, let's keep on trucking and actually get into control flow. All right. So I have here a very simple example to kind of demonstrate that. All right. So we have here some attributes, right? So we have a couple of variables, which are just separate. So we have a car name, that's an Nissan GTR. We have a const, that is top speed. So this doesn't change, right? So this is the top speed of the car, which is set to 250. We have is ICE, which is internal combustion engine, just short for ICE, which is true. So this is a Boolean value, remember? So you have true or false. We have current driver, which is null. So that means that no one is currently driving it. And we have the current speed, which is 0. So it's standing still. Control flow is a number of parameters that you can use to check if something is true. Going to be use control. So here it's very simple. Start with saying if, and if you can see, this is a small right? So nothing in here starts with a capital letter, because that's reserved for different types of things, which we'll cover later on. We're saying if, and then we're opening and closing. You have a bracket. So the structure of the if statement is very simple. So you just say if, open and close, and then you have curly braces that also open and close. And normally these will be on different lines. So it would start here and it will close here, so that everything that you're trying to do will be in here, and everything that you're trying to compare or check is going to be in here. So you say if whatever is in here, okay, is true, then you do whatever is in here, right? And that's that is the if statement structure. So we're saying that, okay, if top speed, which is again is a variable, right? So top speed is here, is more than 200, which is just a number that we're entering here, right? So this is not here coming from a variable, right? And so notice that the and is double. So we have to use double ands to tell it that, okay, we want to also add that the top speed needs to be above 200, as well as the car needs to be like has a combustion engine, has a engine that uses fuel, right? Which is true. And the how if statements work is that it would only take action on what is in here if this is true at the end. So whatever we are checking inside of here, only if that is true will it continue with this part. If not, it would just skip it, right? So we're gonna save that. We're going to go back to our console. We're going to refresh. And we have a problem, which is fine. So what are we missing? It's complaining about identifier is already being declared. Okay, so am I declaring it twice, as I was saying? Oh yeah, okay. So I'm just going to get rid of this. Fine, sorry, using the same name here. So again, because this variable already exists with this name, we can't name a different variable the exact same name. So all of the variable names have to be unique. So I'm going to save that. Go back here. Okay. So let me just comment out these very quickly. Sorry. All right. So it says this car is fast, right? Which is what we're saying here. So if this is all true, so this, if we set it to false, right? So let's pretend this is an electric car, and we would come back here. It's gone. There is no error though, so there is no problem. We're just saying that okay, we're checking, right? So if it has a top speed above 200, and it is a car that uses petrol, then we say that. If not, currently it's not, right? Because not all of the predefined scope is true, right? So all of these are not true. So this is true, this is true. This is true, this is false. Which is not true. Go back, then we get out of it, right? Now we set this to false because I do want to immediately show you what comes after this. So let's say that we're like, okay, if the internal combustion engine is false, then we still want to tell the user something, and this is where an else statement comes in. So we can add an else, and then it again uses curly braces to start and finish something. And then we can otherwise say, okay, we're going to console log this car is not fast enough, for example, right? So currently this is set to false. So we will get this car is not fast enough, right? So this is an alternative thing that we can do. We don't have to. So if we get rid of this, again, it will print nothing. But if we're checking for something and that something turns out to be not true, we can then say that, okay, then do this as a final result. And this is not the only option we have. So we can also check for multiple things. We can also say, we can, instead of the else, we can say else if, and this would give us a new if statement. So here we would then have a new if statement that says, whatever you want to check. And then after that, you can have another else if statement again. And then if you had all of these and none of them were true, then you can still say that, okay, else, here we give up, then we're doing something different, okay? So these are all control flow options, and this is all related generally to information that you're receiving to check whether the values are there that you expect, or a user has inputted something on your website and you just want to check that whatever input they provided is correct and within some parameters that you have predefined. This is where you would use that, right? Now, I'm just going to uncomment these to show you a couple of more operators here. So we have here, so these are comparative operators. So here we're comparing something. Here we're saying that, okay, if it's bigger than, you can use less than. We're saying that if current driver and then there are 3 equal signs, null, then we're doing something. Here we're doing only 2 equal signs. The difference between these two is the 3 equal signs compares value and type. Because if I'm saying that, okay, we have let 1, actually no, 1 equals 1. Let also 1 equals, but sorry, but this is kind of jumping things around for me. This is a this is this is a string and this is a number. If I'm going to say if 1, it already kind of preempted what I was going to do, but I'm going to do only 2, right? Yeah, so I'm really equal. With this try with the double equal symbol. Okay. And we're going to put this if it's correct. So I'm just going to get rid of these very quickly just so that we don't have too much stuff being outputted. So yeah, so it is correct. So it is outputting the text. Are they really equal? Yeah, they're not. But again, so this is the difference, because here we're saying that, okay, if they are equal, and here JavaScript is like, yeah, they're equal to me. This is 1, this is 1, that's perfectly fine. But if we add the third one, they have to be the same in value and in type, which in this case will not fly anymore, because this is a number or like an integer, and this is a string. So these are not the same. And then here, if we save that and rerun it, you see that it has disappeared. There's nothing. And if we add an else statement here, just to output something, okay, if you add all of that, you could have closed it as well. Okay, so we save that, and now it says, yeah, they're not equal. Okay, so it's checking this, which is false, right? So they're not equal. So it's skipping this if block, and then it goes to the else statement to say that, okay, no, they're not equal. Okay, I hope this is clear, and it kind of demonstrates the difference between 2 equal signs and 3 equal signs when you're comparing different values, and how this can be problematic. So if you really want to check that the value that you're validating is really the same to what it is that you have received, then you have to use the 3 equal signs, because then they would have to be equal in value and in type. All right. And that is it for the if statement. And this is only the beginning of the control flow. Okay, I do want to confirm if you guys have a bit more time to stay on the live stream, because it with JavaScript there's just a lot, like really a lot to cover. So if you can chime in on that, we hopefully won't take too much longer, but we'll need maybe another 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so let's continue. All right, let's continue with yeah. So an alternative to so yeah, I already gave this example. Like, you've already seen the if statements, like an else ifs and whatnot. So we're gonna skip these. There's an alternative to the if statement. It's not really an alternative, but if you're checking a variety of things one after the other, then you don't need to write a lot of if statements following one another. You can use a switch statement. which is like one thing. So you just say switch once. You then provide the value that you're checking, right? So this is a variable here that has value. And then we are running a number of tests on that value. So this is basically a switch case, right? So the switch is start. So this is like the fuel elasticity, right? So we're saying if it is zero, then it's out. So it's saying that okay, your tank is right, and then each case break means this is the end of this case, and then we start a new case. Then does it equal that? Then we'll be printing out this or doing whatever, right? So this is just a console log as an example. You can do here whatever you want, assign it to something else, call a function, display something for the user. The console logs here are just like for example, but basically if this is true, you can do whatever you want with that value. And again, we have to break out of this case. And then we're saying case 30. So currently like the value is 30. So this one should be true. And then it says, okay, your tank is full, and we're breaking out of this. And then there is one default value. So if, for example, we have 10 of these, right? And none of these are true. Okay, none of these are what we want. And there are like, you can also have, how do you call it, ranges. So you don't have to you don't need to, for example, say that, okay, it's only 0. You can say, okay, like between 0 and 10, between 10 and 20, something like that. But again, it would depend on the use case. So the default value is like, okay, this is something that will be displayed as a result of everything being false. So none of these matched. So we're falling back to the default value, and then we're just printing out something. All right. And we're breaking at the end. It just closes. So the switch starts here. We're providing whatever we're checking, and then we're opening the curly braces and then closing them at the end, right? Then we have the for loop. All right. So we get into loops. So the if statement, so the conditional statement, these are the if, the else, and the else if and the else. So we're just checking something once, right? So we're just saying, okay, at this moment, I need to check a value, or I will need to compare multiple things to each other. And based on that, I will continue or not, or like do something else. The switch statement we already saw, which is like very similar to the if statement, but more for like if you're comparing many different values to like one specific entry. And then it's just much more concise than writing a whole bunch of if statements one after the other. Then we get into loops. So you have loops do different things, but basically the loop is used to iterate over many values. So you can have a for loop, which is like, okay, I want to do something a number of times. A while loop, where you're saying that, okay, while something is still true, or like until you reach the number 100, you continue, or do while loop. So we'll look at this, and it's not like very complex, but it's very different than an if statement. So we're saying that, okay, for and this is the for loop, right? And you can see that inside of the loop, we are creating a variable. So we're saying let I, which is just an index. So normally when you see a for loop, it will always have this format. So the I just stands for index. It has no particular meaning, just a standard like a notation. It equals to 0. So here I is being set to this state. Right, so this statement will carry the value to the column. After that, saying that, okay, if I is less than 5, Okay, so depending on whether this is true or not, again, the statement is being ended here, right? So we have another semicolon. Then we're saying that, okay, I needs to be incremented. And this is another one of the operators where we are just incrementing the value of this I by 1. This is what the plus plus stands for, right? So we're saying, okay, we want to add, and the plus is just the 1. So basically, we want to add 1. And then we're console logging. It says this is just a string, driving lab, plus I. So whatever the value of I is at that moment, plus 1. And it will basically, the special thing about the for loop is that it will continue here in this exact space. It will run the loop until this condition becomes false, and then it will continue with whatever comes afterwards. So if we copy this and put it here in the script that we're using, and we're going to save that, go back to our page, and you can see that it has now printed this 5 times, right? So before, like for each for statement or console log, we were getting only 1 entry. But here for the for loop, so the for loop, you can look at it as like an if statement, but an if statement that runs until the statement is false. So here we're saying, okay, for let I equals 0, and then until it is, as long as it is less than 5, right? It will basically run this. So if we say if it's less than 10, so if we want to get this 10 times, right? So every time it checks, okay, it will add 1, add 1, add 1, add 1, right? And then you can see we have lap 1, lap 1. And you can see that the data is persistent as well. So it's very important to note that here in the console log itself is static, right? But the I is the only variable that's currently being incremented. So every time, so the first loop is completed, right? We're saying that, okay, I is 0 at this point, and we're adding 1 at the time of logging the console, right? So here we're saying, okay, we have driving lap 1, right? And then here, it's being incremented because remember, like here, the for, we're assigning the value for the first time. And then we're like, okay, it is 0. Is it less than 10? No. Yeah, it's less than 10. Yes. Then we're incrementing 1. So now we're moving here, driving lap plus I, right? We're getting 1. And then it will do the same circle again. So it will keep on doing that. It's reached. That's going to be of course also because if you create a that never ends, then your page will crash. So it will keep on doing this continuously out of memory, and that's it. It will stop working. So for loops are generally used for things that are like you're running through an array. Or like you're trying to display something in a list. So you have, for example, a file, and in the file there are, I don't know, like 100 objects, right? And you're like, okay, out of all of these 100 objects, I want to get the name, okay, of like each one of these. And then you're like, okay, I have this object, I have I0, until the length of the object is not been met, so the length is 100. Keep on doing this. So it will then get the names of all of the 100 objects and add all of these to like a variable or print them out or whatever. And then it would end. But this should never be used for something that is ambiguous. So you don't know how long it will be, because if you're calculating something like 1,000,000 times, this could take a while maybe, right? or it might never finish and break your application. All right. So that is the for loop, right? Um, we'll cover the other variants of it as we have use for them. Just knowing how for loop works is sufficient for now. Um, for each kind of works the same way, but it's specifically for arrays. So it deals with the arrays and object data. So you're saying, okay, for each entry, basically, do this or check that, and it's the same thing, right? So it will do that for the length of that array or object, and then when it's done, it will do whatever you asked it to. All right. So I hope you guys are still with me. Okay, we only have a couple more things, and then we'll jump into utilizing these while building our application very shortly. Okay, so there is a question here that I want to answer. It's actually something that I wanted to talk about as well. So Abdul says, lately it seems that the trend is moving towards TypeScript. Okay, would you say it is still best to learn JavaScript and then TypeScript? I would say yes, because TypeScript is basically built on JavaScript. However, if you're going to be building any modern application, I would strongly advise using TypeScript for that, just for the type safety. At the end of the day, that's what TypeScript is there for. So for each one, like I already mentioned, so for each one of the data points that we have in our application, so whatever variables that we are declaring, instead of saying that, okay, I'm just going to say that, okay, I'm going to give it a name, I will also say that this is an integer or it should be a string, which makes your application more secure. It makes it less ambiguous. So for each data entry, you already decide beforehand what the value should be. However, I also have to say that with very shortly, uh, the variants that are available. So we're gonna choose one. Sometimes, and we're gonna stick with it. I've been like playing around with using a variety, and for consistency while building our application, you're just gonna build one. So while you decide your application build structure, as well as the functionality that it should have and how these should kind of interact with one another, you can kind of leave the TypeScript building mostly to the large language model. However, knowing how JavaScript works will already be sufficient for you to also very quickly be able to understand TypeScript, because it will be the same in terms of functionality. But you will see that there is a lot more information in there for each data entry for each variable, which at the end of the day is just going to make it so that you don't have to kind of deal with that complexity. But when you see it, you will immediately like understand what it's trying to do. So yes, the trend is TypeScript, and again, for a reason, because type safety, so knowing the type of data that you're handling at any given point in time, is very important. For security, for making sure that the functions that you're calling, the data that you're passing, that you always know whatever data that you're getting. I mean, we went through an example of like checking one and one, but one is a string and one is an integer. In Java is happy, or JavaScript is happy to tell you, yeah, they're equal. Well, they're not. In TypeScript, this is not allowed. So it already has a lot of inherent improvements in that regard. But because you will most mostly not be typing out the TypeScript yourself. That's why we're kind of covering JavaScript here, and we will be comparing JavaScript to TypeScript very shortly, just to highlight the major differences. And then as you start to build your application, you can choose for yourself whether you want to use that in whether you want to do that in JavaScript or not. However, considering we will start to build the application now, we will use TypeScript by default. But you don't have to, right? So there's nothing wrong with just building an application with JavaScript. I mean, there are plenty of applications out there that still just use plain JavaScript just because they were there or they were built before TypeScript was a thing. But you could also easily convert these to TypeScript at some point. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Okay. Just a couple more things before we conclude for today. And I know this is quite a long session, but yeah, JavaScript really has a lot to offer, and there's a lot to cover. And we're like still just scratching the surface, to be honest, with when it comes to JavaScript. So let's talk about functions. And functions are very simple. They are blocks of code that you can easily reuse. So a function is I've created here like a very, very simple function. So you start by saying, okay, I want to create a function. So you call it a function, just like you call a variable. You give it a name. And the difference is then the function is in a we're giving two terms. One is this, and one is fuel used. All right. And then you also decide to happen when the function is run. And we're saying, okay, return to us, right? So it's going to return a value of distance divided by fuel used to do the calculation. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you for letting me know. I mean, I'm very happy that the audio issues are very brief. And the important part to know about the functions, okay, are that the return value can be immediately like passed to something, but let's use this function first, and then we'll cover that. So let's do. All right. So when we're calling the function, we do it like this. So we write the name of the function, and then after we write the name of the function, we provide input for the parameters that it expects, because we have two parameters, right? So we kind of have to know what these parameters are. So one is distance and the other is fuel. So here by default, we're like, okay, cool. We're giving 100 as a distance and we're giving 5 as fuel used. We can also say that, yeah, okay, cool. We can also say that, okay, we're going to create a variable, and that variable's value is the result of running this function. So we're calling this function, we're saying, okay, we want to calculate efficiency. And we're saying that let's pretend that we have an application that people can use to calculate the efficiency of their car, right? So we can say that, okay, let user distance, right, is 100, and user fuel used, where did you go? Okay, is 5. So here we can also just provide the variables. User distance, user fuel used, right? So we're creating a variable. That variable is basically calling the function, passing it other variables as input, right? And then we can say we're going to console log fuel efficiency plus calculated, right? Because that's the name of our variable. So what we want is, okay, we're doing all of this calculation. At the end of the day, we want to display this somewhere. So we're doing it to the console, but I mean, later when we get into manipulating the DOM, we can provide this to the user. So we can have a field in which this value will be entered as the users like adds this and says like submit or like presses a button in the application. We're console logging fuel efficiency. You know, we're calling here calculated, and then we're saying that this is kilometer per liter. Is 20 kilometers per liter. And if like they drove 200, still used only 5 liters. So the calculation is going to change. Now it says, okay, your efficiency is 40 kilometers per liter, right? So I hope this makes sense. And here we created this function, right? And what we're doing here is we're just calling it, and we can call it different. And the property, the purpose of the function is that you can call this a number of times. So you just create the function at some point, and then you can just call it anytime that you want. So if our application provides this functionality in various different pages, so there are different places where you can like use this, like you want to have this functionality available, we can export this function to make it available in other pages in our application. And then, it would work everywhere, but it would still just use this logic that's only defined here. And if at some point we're like, okay, we want to add something to the function, so we want to add a different parameter, let's say, weather, for example, was it winter, was it summer, anything, okay? We just change the function, and then we need to make sure that, okay, there is a different entry point for the user to also choose their like weather that they drove in, and then everything else would stay the same. So everywhere where we have called this function would still work, granted that also we make sure that we have all of the three how do you call it, all of the three parameters being addressed, right? And the function does need all of its parameters to be there, right? So if we say that we need 2 parameters because all of them are being used in like the function logic, if one of them is missing, then of course this would the function would error out and say that it's missing values where it's expecting some, right? So yeah, these are functions. Again, very powerful, and this is like quite normal to create a lot of functions in your application to not have to repeat code that you're going to be using or over and over again. So every time that you find yourself that, okay, there is a block of code that you are continuously copying and pasting somewhere else, that's a perfect example of creating a function for yourself so that you can just call the function and that's it. And again, calling it is just yeah, maybe I'll just give this very brief example. So if we create a function, say hello, okay, and yeah, so the input is name, so it would return hello and then the name of like the entry, right? And then we're like, okay, let's console log, and we're just calling the function even in the console log. So calling the function is very simple. So it's just say hello, and then between quotes, you're providing the input that's expected for the function. That is basically calling the function, right? And here we're saying, okay, we are calling this function and we're passing the name in. So if we're saving that, you say that, okay, it runs basically through the function, right? Because here we're just calling the function, and console log does not know what this does. So at the point of console logging, you call the function, and the function then says, okay, I do this. Space, and then the variable is passed to the function, and then mark at the end, right? And that's what you get. Okay. All right. Sound issues are back. Okay, great. Just thinking if I want to cover more about functions at this particular time. We've covered the most important bits and pieces. Maybe one thing that I'm just going to show very, very quickly. So if you're writing a very simple function, you can write it as an arrow function. That's what it's called. It's a simplified way to write it in one line, so it can't be broken. So for example, here we still have const calculate efficiency equals the parameters that you need, and then you just put in an arrow instead of opening and closing the curly braces. And then the return is implied, so it would automatically return the value. So you don't have to tell it to return anything. It would just does that. It would just do that by default, and you just tell it what it needs to do with the parameters. So you declare the function without even without saying function. So you just say const, you give it a name, you say okay, this is the value that I'm assigning to this constant, and because you are requesting parameters, JavaScript and the interpreter are like, okay, then this is a function, because only functions take parameters. So the parameters are here, and then you're like, okay, this is what I want to do with them, which is like equals with a larger than sign. So just create an arrow. That's why it's called an arrow function. And you're like, okay, this is what I want to do with the provided parameters. And then by default, it will return the value, right? You can use this. You can choose to not use it. It's an option. But again, this all has to be in one line. And this is something that you will see if you're like looking at someone else's code, or you're taking a script from somewhere online. Just know that, this is a function, just like this is a function. They do the exact same thing, but they just look differently. All right. Okay. Yeah. So arrow functions. Yeah. I don't think you will have problems using arrow functions. So arrow functions came out quite a long time ago by now. So there isn't a modern browser that doesn't support them or doesn't know how to interpret these properly. So yeah, it will become like up to you basically if that's something that you want to use. Personally, I don't use them much. I just find this more like consistent, or like this is more consistent, instead of having like small functions be like this, then bigger functions looking like that. But again, it's a preference that you can make for yourself. So I'll leave DOM manipulation for the next time, because we've already today's session is already quite long, and DOM manipulation is quite fun. So I really want to spend some time on that. But DOM manipulation, so DOM stands for Document Object Model. And this is basically how the browser sees your app. We've already covered, of course, like pieces of it. So with all of the elements in HTML, with these elements, with CSS. So selecting else is very different than CSS, for example, because you interacting with the while page has already loaded. So you're using functions, right? Which again is going to be all that we're going to be using. So there will be a lot of function calls. So we're saying, okay, we have a document, which is a function of the browser. And we're saying that, okay, get element by ID. Again, you have elements declared as HTML. These have names, and that's what the ID then stands for. So you get an element by its ID, and then you can do something with it. And then you can add something. So if you have a field, just like the example I was giving before when we were talking about the car efficiency here. So if we have a form in our application where a user can fill in these two values, and then they press the submit button, and then the calculation happens in the background, and the return of the function needs to be displayed as a result of their calculation, then that's where JavaScript will come in. So we will say, okay, we have taken these two values, we're then calling the function to calculate efficiency, and the return of that value we are going to put inside of a different field. So we're going to get an element by ID, and we're going to say, okay, update that element with that value that we have gotten back from our function. This is just a simple example, of course, right? There are many different things you can do, but also there is like a lot that can happen when you how do you call it? When users do something on the page, right? So you can do something when a user like updates, for example, a field or clicks on a toggle. That can like enable or disable something. This is also used when you have like websites that support dark mode and light mode. This is all handled by JavaScript. So hopefully, yeah. So here, if I click this, there is a listener in the background, and when I click it, there is JavaScript that basically changes the CSS property of this page to make it go dark, and then it does the opposite when I say that I want light mode. And all of this is JavaScript behavior, basically. Okay, so DOM manipulation we'll leave for next time because there is quite a lot to cover with DOM manipulation specifically. So I think it will be a good starting point for the next session. Yeah, event listeners and everything, because this is all tying into the DOM manipulation part. So next week, we'll be continuing a bit with JavaScript, but putting more of it into practice. We're going to be building a small little application where it has a form. We take information, and based on that, we add something to the page. So we're going to play around with the possibilities that JavaScript provides us, and like putting all of that to actual practice. One important thing that you guys also need to be doing, if not already done so, choose the application that you want to be building. So whatever SaaS that you're interested in building, so that most probably after the next session, we will already be putting in the foundation to start building that within the framework that we've chosen. Because at some point we're going to be leaving behind, just discovering what in some ground rule we need to make sure that we build gravity, we build tension, and that we don't let the large language model just like build something at random for us. So we really want to build the application at our own pace and with the things that we really want, and like nothing else, because otherwise it would become very quickly very big and complex, with most probably a lot of things that you don't want, which is something that is unfortunately a reality of like the current large language models, is that they kind of make a lot of decisions on your behalf and make your application way too complex from the get-go, and then you kind of have to deal with that complexity as you like continue building it. So yeah, do make your choice there already, and then in 2 weeks time max, we will really be starting to build it, and that's when we will be making quite a lot of progress. But that's why like these sessions that we've had now in the past couple of weeks are kind of just laying down the foundation for that, so that when you do start building, that you can actually recognize a lot of the things in these scripts that will be created for you, based on everything that we've covered, and so that it isn't immediately overwhelming and kind of gets you lost of where to go, because we kind of have to eventually link it to external systems. And this is where a lot of the complexity will come in. So all of this will become relatively trivial in the next couple of weeks. So everything that we've covered will just become like old news in something very simple. But we also have to interact with other systems and link them together. And this will require more research, more knowledge about systems, not about just a language. All right. So with that, I would like to conclude for today. I want to thank you for joining. I hope that you enjoyed today's stream. Again, apologies for the audio issues. And we'll pick it up again next week, again on Saturday, same time. We'll see you then. Thank you all, and have a good evening. Take care. Bye bye.